Hello and welcome back to Pics and Portraits. This is exciting. This is a very exciting video as it is the first requested by a patron over at patreon.com/picsandportraits. For their subject, they have chosen pulp science fiction. That's right, we're going to be looking at sci-fi and how it appeared in pulp magazines from the late 1910s until the genre's peak in the 1950s. But first I want to take a quick trip to the origins of science fiction. In a way, science fiction is as old as fiction itself. In fact, many cite the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving work of literature, as the first piece of science fiction. The Sumerian poem featured gods and mythical beasts, but feels more akin to the modern definition of fantasy rather than science fiction. Another piece of ancient poetry, Indian poet Valmiki's Ramayana, featured floating structures and supernatural weapons capable of destroying entire cities. While both of these are often discussed as proto-sci-fi, we find a much more familiar progenitor in Lucien of Samasoda's A True Story. The 2nd century novel was written as a satirical farce and included a trip to the moon as well as a battle between the aliens found there and ones from the sun. When we think about what exactly defines science fiction, certain scenes or tropes come to mind, most of which appeared elsewhere long before that term was ever coined. A True Story's depictions of space travel and alien life forms are believed to be the first of their kind, though similar themes do appear in Arabic folklore alongside descriptions of brass, robot-like figures, and underwater civilizations. An early example of my favorite subgenre, time travel, can be seen in Urashima Taro, the Japanese fairy tale dating back to the 8th century in which a fisherman saves a turtle. As a reward, the turtle brings him to an underwater palace. There, he meets a princess who gives him a box he is never to open. When he returns to his village a few days later, he finds himself 300 years into the future, his friends and family gone. Opening the box, he is immediately transformed into an old man. Throughout the Age of Enlightenment, we see authors begin to speculate on what the future may hold. In 1516, Thomas More's Utopia gave name to the perfect society, and Samuel Madden's 1733 novel, Memoirs of the 20th Century, envisioned the political landscape of the 1990s. In 1818, we get the definitive welcome with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which, yes, featured a mad scientist, but more importantly, moral reasoning. Speculating on the ethical repercussions of our advancement has long been a cornerstone of science fiction, be it the trust placed in AI in 2001, or in Frankenstein's case, the creation of life. A lot of people know Shelley exclusively for Frankenstein, though she also wrote other seminal sci-fi works, including The Last Man, one of the earliest examples of a post-apocalyptic future. The term scientific romance first appeared in the mid-19th century to describe the writing of French author Jules Verne. Verne's novels presented exciting and adventurous stories that relied on scientific invention to carry his protagonists to the moon or to the center of the Earth. The success of these novels helped popularize the emerging genre and inspired many within both the literary and scientific communities. Our last stop is English writer H.G. Wells, whose socially conscious brand of sci-fi used fantastic ideas to comment on modern society. His two most popular works, The Time Machine and War of the Worlds, examine class and British imperialism respectively, while The Island of Dr. Moreau looked at animal cruelty and the effect we have on nature. The work of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells inspired much of what we're about to discuss. Now, we talked about the dime novel in our History of the Cowboy video, which this very much feels like a spiritual successor to, but to recap, this was America's first form of mass media specifically targeting the working class. They were affordable and easily digestible books that presented sensational stories aiming to entertain rather than enrich. With advancements in paper processing and printing techniques, it became faster and more affordable to churn out low-cost magazines. In the late 19th century, dime publishers began converting to a new format printed on pulp paper. The first pulp magazine, or pulp, was Frank Munsey's Argosy in 1896. This was extremely successful and led to other publishers following suit, most notably Street and Smith. Their pulp, the popular magazine, introduced perhaps the most enduring feature of the pulps, the dramatic, full-color cover. Many early pulps consisted of generic fiction to appeal to a mass audience, be they short or serialized stories. This meant adventure and romance stories would appear in the same issue as a detective or horror story. The earliest example I could find of a niche pulp was Munsey's Railroad Man's magazine in 1906, though Street and Smith are the ones generally credited with segmenting fiction genres into individual specialized magazines. In 1919, they launched the Thrill Book. Though the stories contained were promoted as unusual or unclassifiable, by today's standards many would be considered science fiction. It was edited first by Harold Hersey, followed by Ronald Oliphant. Under Oliphant, Thrillbook leaned further into the fantasy and sci-fi genres, the most prominent piece being Francis Stevens' The Heads of Cerberus. After only 9 months, the Thrillbook ceased publication. This is generally attributed to poor sales, as well as a printer's strike. J.C. Henneberger and J.M. Lanzinger founded the World Publishing Corporation of Chicago in 1922. Previously, Henneberger had published a successful college humor, and together with Lanzinger launched Weird Tales in 1923. Even though the pulp was intended to showcase fantasy and horror stories, the first editor, Edwin Baird, had a background in crime fiction and very little interest or knowledge in the intended subject matter. This notwithstanding, he did acquire early stories from H.P. Lovecraft before being replaced by Farnsworth Wright the following year. Wright expanded the editorial boundaries of Weird Tales and began building a stable of writers and artists that contributed to the magazine's identity. These included Conan the Barbarian creator Robert E. Howard, Gray LaSpina, and Margaret Brundage, who illustrated many of the iconic covers, particularly the ones with the naked women. Alright. Weird Tales also has the distinction of publishing the first professional writing of a 16-year-old Tennessee Williams. Wright promoted science fiction stories because still there was no American magazine specifically dedicated to it. This changed in 1926 with the launch of Hugo Gernsback's Amazing Stories. Gernsback was an inventor and publisher with a background in radio and electronics, mostly in an amateur capacity. In 1908, he began publishing Modern Electrics, dubbed the Electrical Magazine for everybody. It consisted of information on parts and other aspects of amateur radio, though Gernsback would eventually use the magazine to publish his own science fiction. He sold the magazine and founded the Electrical Experimenter, a similar concept in 1913. Under the umbrella of experimental publishing, Hugo and his brother Sidney would go on to publish other magazines as well as operate a radio station, WRNY, beginning in 1925. Broadcasting from the Roosevelt Hotel, they utilized the station for cross-promoting their magazines and experimentation, including one of the first television transmissions. With the publication of Amazing Stories, Gernsback wrote himself into the history of sci-fi alongside H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, quite literally. A lot of the early content contained in Amazing were reprints or serializations from these authors, as well as his own original work, which was said to be terrible. Gernsback was notoriously cheap and would often pay contributors late or not at all, leading many established writers to avoid submitting. While this all may sound negative, Amazing Stories was extremely influential in the early development of science fiction, or scientifiction as Gernsback called it. The over-the-top covers, illustrated by Frank R. Paul, informed the aesthetics of the genre, while the discussions column allowed readers to interact with one another, encouraging and creating a community, effectively giving birth to science fiction fandom, for better or worse. Now, not only did Hugo Gernsback have issues paying his contributors, he also had issues paying the printers. He would lose control of his assets, including Amazing Stories, following a bankruptcy lawsuit in early 1929. The magazine didn't miss an issue, however, and is one of the few from the pulp era that continues to this day. Gernsback would immediately begin publishing two new magazines, Science Wonder Stories and Air Wonder Stories, that would be merged into Wonder Stories in 1930. That same year, Astounding Stories of Super Science debuted. Originally published by William Clayton, it was sold to Street and Smith in 1933. Astounding paid considerably higher than Amazing, allowing them to publish distinguished authors like Jack Williamson and John W. Campbell. Like many, Campbell began his career by selling to Amazing Stories. Astounding would serialize his novel, The Mightiest Machine, in 1935, and in 1937 offer him a position as editor. His acceptance is considered to be the dawn of the golden age of science fiction. Campbell worked with several authors synonymous with the genre and helped develop the talent that defines it to this day. These include Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, and Isaac Asimov, whose first story also appeared in Amazing Stories. The late 30s were a boom period for science fiction, and many pulps emerged to capitalize on its popularity. While these competitors were mainly focusing on the sensational aspects of sci-fi, Campbell wanted to present stories that were more mature and of a scientific nature. Many of these contributors, Asimov, Heinlein, had a background in science and could add legitimacy to their stories. This would come to be known as hard sci-fi, and some authors were so successful in their realism the FBI raided Astounding's offices, following the publication of Cleve Cartmell's Deadline due to its similarity to the Manhattan Project. One author Campbell was particularly fond of was L. Ron Hubbard. He not only published Hubbard's fiction, but helped him develop his therapeutic techniques. In the late 1940s, Hubbard approached Campbell with a new form of therapy he coined Dianetics. It was similar to psychoanalysis, where people would purge themselves of past trauma by reliving it. Campbell believed in Dianetics so much so that he not only got Hubbard in touch with a doctor they hoped could legitimize the process, but also recruited science fiction fans to test out the theories. These theories were widely ridiculed, not only by the medical community but also those close to Campbell, including Williamson, Asimov, and Alfred Bester, who refused to have his work published in Astounding due to Campbell's involvement in Dianetics. This did not stop Campbell from promoting and publishing Hubbard's articles on Dianetics, which would become the basis of the Church of Scientology just a short time later. Astounding was the first of the sci-fi pulps to convert to a digest size and was followed by many over the next couple of years, bringing an end to the period we are going to discuss. The advent of the paperback and the acceptance of science fiction by larger literary publishers also contributed to the decline of pulp fiction. However, as a genre, science fiction was never hotter, and these authors could find plenty of work writing for movies or the new medium of television. Science fiction continues to have a loyal following, and many magazines are published to this day, be it in print or online. Now, this was not meant to be an exhaustive history, but hopefully it gives you a decent overview of both pulp and science fiction, I am no expert, so if I missed anything, feel free to correct or comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and again, this video was requested on our Patreon, patreon.com/picsandportraits, so if you like what we do and want to support us, you can do so there. I'm Brian Clark, thank you so much for watching.